Okay, let's hear it for the new guard. Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, George Russell, 1, 2, 3 in qualifying for the Russian Grand Prix. There was a little window right at the end when they were all out on slicks, and that's where the grid was defined. And it was defined because those young guns, those three drivers, Lando, Carlos, Ferrari obviously, and then George Russell, all opted for slicks sooner than Mercedes did. And as a result, they were able to get more warm-up time into the slick tyres and get in a lap as the checkered flag was coming out. For his part, Lewis Hamilton, and I guess we have to say here that this is a function, again, of Mercedes being at the front, doing everything right, having a great weekend in front of them, but not being in a position, I guess you got to say that, to make these calls on the fly. To me, it was incredible. Lewis had been quickest in Q1 on intermediates, quite a lot of spray around, 45.9. He then did a 45.1 in Q2. Again, everybody on intermediates and a lot less spray. The only gamble at that point was whether you stayed out on the intermediates and like Lewis, you put your lap time in lap 6 when the tyre was becoming a slick, or whether you went for a new set like Fernando Alonso, who was very quick in Q2, but on a new set of intermediates. That's presumably what was going through their minds as they prepared for Q3. But it wasn't raining, the track was getting drier, and there was that element of the intermediate gaining grip when the tread went away. And that is a sign, of course, that slicks need to be considered. So Lewis goes out at the beginning of Q3, does a really good job, 44.0 on intermediates, probably the ultimate lap time you're ever going to do on intermediates on a slightly greasy track around Sochi. Valtteri Bottas in brackets have to say 44.7 at that point, so that tells its own story. Really good lap by Lewis. But while he was doing all that, you've got, as I say, the young guns, the Landos, the Russells, the Ferraris with Carlos Sainz. And Carlos Sainz, slightly different situation because he was not quick at all. He was P10 on intermediates in Q2, just made it through ahead of Sebastian Vettel just by a few thousandths of a second. Anyway, for him, it was a relatively straightforward call. Let's see if we can get onto the slicks and do something, particularly with the intermediates picking up grip, as I say, when the tread went away. So by the time the penny dropped for Mercedes and they decided to bring their drivers in for slicks, there was not a lot of time with which to play. Obviously, you want to have as much time as possible on the slick to get temperature into it. So when Lewis came in, trying hard, pushing hard, he lost it in the pit lane, understeered into the concrete wall and damaged the nose of the Mercedes. That, of course, added about another 30 seconds to the pit stop, which then compromised Lewis's ability to go out and get temperature in the tyres. And on his one quick lap at the end before the flag, he spun and the pole went away. All that needed to have happened is that Lewis should have made the call right at the beginning of Q3 and said, right, get the slicks ready, I'm coming in, as did the young guns. And we'll get onto those in a moment. So it was another example. I think you've got to put this up alongside Monza, where, again, to repeat the point, Mercedes super quick on Friday morning. And then the weekend fell away from them because they failed to put Lewis on the soft tyre for the sprint race. McLaren were on the soft. And after that, as we know, it all changed for Lewis Hamilton. I say Lewis specifically there because he was on the dirty side of the grid. And guess what? Lewis lines up P4 tomorrow, again on the dirty side of the grid. And the time below him, 1 minute 44.0, is the time he did on the intermediates. And he got Lando Norris on the pole doing a 41.9. What was that I said again? Yes, Lando Norris on the pole. Sounds so good to say that. Nobody deserves it more than Lando. And it shouldn't be forgotten that he was P4 in Q2 on the intermediates. He's been brilliant all weekend. Yesterday it was kind of strange because he only ran the soft tyre throughout FP2. So it was kind of difficult to evaluate where he was. And he didn't do that many laps towards the end of the session either. But here he was looking absolutely superb in the McLaren-Mercedes. I say superb because we're not talking about massive opposite lock slides here or incredible car control, although of course his car control is incredible. We're talking about a driver in perfect harmony with what he's doing. And we've seen it so many times this year, just looking perfectly in tune with the conditions, with the balance of the car. Everything is soft-edged, everything is beautiful to watch. When he needs to get the car a little bit straighter with additional mid-corner rotation that's coming, he was absolutely faultless going into turn 13, the corner you were talking about yesterday with the weight transfer, how he was getting the car stopped. Interesting to see how stiff they're running at the front. He's actually lifting an inside front wheel going in there, but he's living with that, and the car just looked brilliant, as did Lando. Perfect lap by him. The only thing you could say, of course, is that like Lewis, Lando yesterday also spun into the pit lane, coming into the pit lane about the same point that Lewis had the understeer moment. Lando had a massive oversteer moment and crunched the nose. But in Lando's defence, it was not caused by anything other than some sort of glitch in the engine which locked the rear wheel. So let's hope that doesn't happen again. Anyway, brilliant performance by Lando Norris. Great to see. And just to put that into perspective, let's have a look at the lap time that his teammate Daniel Ricciardo did. Daniel coming, of course, off his win at Monza, full of confidence. Daniel, the driver, who's very good in changeable conditions, wet offline, dry groove. This is all Daniel Ricciardo territory, but look at the lap times. 44, Daniel Ricciardo 44.1, Lando Norris 41.9. And that isn't just bravery, that is touch and feel and skill and all the things that go together to put this driver in a category, shall we say it now? Yeah, he's a 4-box tick driver. And I did also say after Monza that that win will have established McLaren now as a genuine threat to Mercedes and Red Bull. And so I think it's proved. And Lando, after qualifying, was saying, he was full of charm and humility, actually, saying he couldn't believe his pole. He felt obviously that Mercedes and Red Bull would be quicker in the race. I mean, they will be quicker, but whether or not it's going to be easy for them to pass Lando is another matter. McLaren are not slow in a straight line, and that will have not escaped Mercedes' attention again for the second race in succession. But there was a lovely phrase that Lando used at one point when he was trying to say, yeah, you know, this is what I think he was trying to say. I love those conditions, and I got the best from the car, and it was a really pleasurable lap to drive because I could just feel that it was the ultimate. But instead of which, he said something like, I don't want to make myself sound good, which is his way of saying, I don't want to talk about myself. You can make your own judgment. So my judgment, Lando, is that that was a superlative lap. I think Max would have been pleased with that lap, and I think Charles Leclerc would have been pleased with that lap. Having said all of that, you know, how must, particularly Max, well, we can add Charles to that as well, how must those two guys be feeling now? Because they're starting from the back of the grid. And not only that, Lewis Hamilton messed up qualifying for the second successive race, if you include the sprint race at Monza. I think you can probably say with reasonable assurance that this was a qualifying session in which Max Verstappen would have had a very, very good chance of taking the pole if Mercedes had done what they did and Max was in the other Red Bull. And I'm sure that would have been what would have happened. And I think Max probably would have been on the pole, not to detract in any way from Lando, because the Red Bull is a quicker car for sure in those conditions. And I think Charles Leclerc would have been right up there as well. So we, the fans, have been deprived of Max and Charles right at the front of this race. But it's not the end of the world because Mercedes managed to trip up again. And we've got this incredible top three of Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, George Russell to talk about and to think about and watch tomorrow. So that's good news. But if you're Max right now, you're very frustrated because you're going into the race. You can't even, because today was wet, normally at the back, he could say, okay, we'll start on hard tyres. The guys at the front will be on medium. We'll try and do a longer stint. That's the usual thing. He can't even do that because now that qualifying has been held in the wet, everybody can start on whatever dry, assuming it is dry tomorrow, whatever dry compound they want. They've got to run two different compounds still in the race, but you'll probably find everybody at the front of the grid probably starting on mediums and then either going to hard or, I don't know, maybe going to soft even. But for Max, that little card has been taken off the table as well because he basically will be running the same strategy as everybody else. And that's, it's a shame. He did what we said he was going to do, which is the one statutory lap in Q1 and then push the car away. What was the point of taking any risk? Just push it away because he was always going to be starting from the back of the grid. Interesting to see Charles Leclerc didn't do that. He actually ran the full length of Q1. He got into Q2, obviously, didn't go out at all in Q2. But he was on the radio a lot talking about the intermediates. He wanted to see how quickly they went off. And he was just out there. And when he was out, he was always quicker than Carlos Sainz. But towards the end, he was just backing away and making sure Carlos got a relatively good lap in, I think. So, yeah, a disappointing day in terms of not having those two brilliant drivers up there as well. But it's not all lost because we've got Lando on the pole. We've got Carlos Sainz second and George Russell third in the Williams. So talking about Carlos now, he looked very edgy, got to say, on intermediates. There were a few braking lockups. He went straight on. There was a spin, and there was a spin on the slicks as well. But he did get it together on the dry tyre. And this is Carlos Sainz, I think, showing that the Ferrari is a pretty good drivable car. And, he was always going to get beaten probably by Lando, even in the same car. As we saw at McLaren last year, it was pretty close. In the last 2 years, Lando's always out-qualified Carlos Sainz. That's an interesting point. And probably would have been thinking about that, when he was thinking, P2 today, Lando's P1, story of the McLaren days. And George Russell, again, absolutely superb in the Williams. He was out there, get the slicks ready, prep the slicks, I want to come in, get on the slicks. It was typical George, and it was a typical George lap, just getting the best from that car. Everything looked right on the edge, as it always does with George. But to have two British drivers, two young new British drivers, probably says quite a lot again about the future of Formula One, doesn't it? Albeit that Charles and Max weren't there to play today. But we shouldn't at this point, and we need to bring Nicholas Latifi into the conversation, because in Q1, Nicholas Latifi was actually quicker than George, and he was P10 in Q1, 48.2, George at a 48.3. But then he didn't go out in Q2 because of some sort of engine problem, and as a result of that, they're changing a whole lot of stuff, and he too has to start from the back of the grid. So that was a big disappointment for Nicholas after a very, very good job in Q1. So Lewis is fourth, Daniel is fifth, but P6, again, Fernando Alonso, stunning. It's interesting, isn't it? Ever since he won the Hungarian Grand Prix, Esteban Ocon has kind of been at the mercy of Fernando Alonso when it comes to putting in quick laps, particularly quick laps under pressure in difficult conditions, or if the car isn't quite right. I guess that's what a win may do to a young driver in this world in which we live. And I'm sure Esteban will quickly get through that, and we'll get back to being the old guy that could pick a car up by the scruff of the neck. But right now, it's Fernando Alonso who's doing that at Alpine. And again, like Lando, particularly into turn 13, I thought he looked sublime. He looked to be right on the edge of where you can brake without locking anything up, and then just a beautiful flowing entry into the corner. It's difficult to describe how he's doing that. I still don't get Fernando, because there is that steering, that initial steering flick, but the car nonetheless is just beautifully settled on the road. All I can say is that it's just hand and footwork that we're never getting to see. Handwork a little bit you see on the onboard, but we don't see all of it. Certainly footwork. I'm sure Fernando's dancing on those pedals more perhaps than any other driver on the track. So just a great result for him, I thought. Really pleased for Fernando, because it was a big thing for him to come back to Formula One and try to do something in the Alpine. And right now he's showing that he is as quick probably as anybody in the world. And yeah, it's a bit of a shame he's in the Alpine, I guess, but nonetheless the team's growing with him, and he's growing with the team, and he's there for another year. So, and Fernando will be very, very pleased with what he did today. I suspect Fernando will be thinking, in the context of everything he's done in his career, what he did today was probably about as satisfying as anything that's ever happened to him in Formula One. So good job, Fernando. Very, very good. Valtteri Bottas, like Lewis, left it so late that he couldn't really get temperature into the slicks, so he's P7 based on his intermediate tyre lap time. And Lance Stroll, who's invariably good in the wet, was P7. And then finally there was Sergio Perez, P9, disappointing, but you'd expect him to be there. This is where they'll be feeling not having a really quick driver in that other car, because in that Red Bull Honda around Sochi in those conditions, you'd expect Sergio Perez to be top three. He should have been top three. As it is, he's starting P9, and Esteban Ocon P10 in the other Alpine. So I'm sure Mercedes will put a good spin on this. It'll be along the lines of, yeah, our car's different. We couldn't get the temperature in the tyres, but tomorrow's another day and it's going to be dry. It's a whole new ball game, and we've got strategy, this and that. But for me, this is all about the next generation of young drivers working with the team to the point where they're not just taking advice, they're forcing the issue and saying, yeah, let's get out on the slicks, I can feel it now. And energizing the team around that. I think Mercedes is a team where it's so well organized and so well structured that everybody plays their role. And the one thing that isn't happening, probably, I may be wrong here, but the one thing that isn't happening is that somebody like a Lewis or a Valtteri, let's say a Lewis, isn't saying, forget all that, do this. And that's maybe what we saw today, I think. And most of the time it works for Mercedes, the way they run it. But today was a day when a Lewis Hamilton, who has won, I don't know, 1 million races at Rye House in the wet, in freezing conditions, and knows all about track changing and how to drive as the track is changing. We didn't see Lewis doing a lap in those changeable conditions. We saw him coming in too late, and we saw him under pressure, making a mistake coming into the pit lane, new nose on the car. By the time he was out, tyres weren't warm enough, and he lost the pole. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. We've got Max and Charles and Nicholas Latifi at the back of the grid. We've got Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz on the front row, McLaren and a Ferrari on the front row. I wonder when we last had that sort of combination. Absolutely brilliant to say that. And we've got George Russell up there, who will no doubt be making life very difficult for everyone who wants to get past him. And then we've got Fernando Alonso, who also will be enjoying having that blue Alpine right up there as well. So not an easy day for Lewis Hamilton tomorrow after everything that's happened. But as I say, the forecast at the moment is dry. If it's wet tomorrow, well, that's another ball game yet again. Anyway, we'll see what happens. See you then.